Welcome to another edition of the Star Local Media Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch. I'm the sports editor with Star Local Media, and I am being joined by Devin Hassan, sports editor for the Mesquite News and the Rowlett Lakeshore Times, as well as Justin Thomas, who's the sports editor for our Denton County papers. And gentlemen, let's talk the Varsitys for the last time. Our annual high school sports awards, the Varsitys, those conclude this week. As has been the case for these past 2 Mondays, we're going to take one award for this current iteration of the Varsitys, bring that to the open air, discuss who we picked for that category, who were the other teams that were in contention, what was the thought process in our eventual decisions, and just highlight one last bit of the one of these standout moments from the 2017-18 school year. First off, props to everybody for checking out the podcast over these first 2 iterations of our Varsitys themed podcast. The first week we talked about breakthrough athletes of the year. Last week we discussed performances of the year. So if you haven't had a chance to check those out, you can go to starlocalmedia.com to listen to those podcasts. Now we're down to the last week of these. We're down to the big 3 awards. So best male athlete, best female athlete, and the category that we're going to discuss today, best team. We're going to go through and touch on all 14 of our markets and what our selections for best team were. Justin, let's just get right to it. Wherever you want to start, whichever of your markets you want to lead off with. Give me one of your best team mentions for this iteration of the Varsitys.
So, like you said, multiple markets. So I have multiple selections, and then I have one team that I feel like was kind of the best team of all my markets. So I'll kind of build up to that, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess we can start in with my lone 5A team, the Colony.
Okay.
Obviously had a big year last year with the softball team winning the state championship, and they didn't win it this year. They actually lost in the second round, but I've still selected the Colony softball team as my best team from the Colony. Finished second in district to Prosper, but obviously a really good Prosper team. I saw them play their first game. It was pretty competitive. Prosper ended up winning by 4 in the last inning, but really good game. So didn't get the district title, but finished second, and then, as I said, lost in the second round of the playoffs, but they lost to the team that won the state championship, Forney. So no really shame there in bowing out to the eventual state champ and, going down in the last inning on a rundown. So, they were right there, almost took Forney to 3 games, the eventual champ. So I took the Colony softball, and kind of what really set them over for the edge to me was just the when looking at the other teams at the Colony, just the individual talent on the softball team was just ridiculous. They, for a team that didn't win the district, how many teams don't win their district and lose in the second round and have 4 players make the all-state team?
Wow. So, when you put it that way, yeah.
So yeah, pretty good. Or actually 3, I think. Jada Coleman, Madison Hirsch, and Zaria Steiner.
Jada Coleman, that's a shocker.
J.C. Hemlin also, so that was 4, yeah. So 4 all-state players, multiple superlative winners, all-district players, and stuff like that. So I picked the Colony softball team again.
Because you had no shortage of viable candidates for that award this year.
Yeah.
They made the playoffs in every sport. I think the girls basketball team actually went a round further.
They went 1 round further than everybody else, but they didn't play a state champion in the second round, so that's why I went with the softball team.
To be fair. Devin, how about you, man? Where did you land on either Rowlett or Mesquite?
I had a lot of I guess contenders for the crown, so to speak. A lot of them with pretty similar reasons. I mean, you had teams like the Saxony football team that entered the season with huge expectations and lived up to them for the most part. They didn't go as far as they would have liked, but they did make school history. They advanced past the area round for the first time ever. Obviously, started the season 12-0. You had teams that kind of came out of nowhere. I shouldn't say nowhere, because Horn's been a perennial playoff team in football, but they weren't expected to win the district championship. I think in the preseason, coaches poll they were picked 3rd, but they jumped on Longview in the season opener with a kind of an eye-opening blowout win. Longview obviously had won 10 of the last 11 district championships, and Horn ends up going undefeated. And so it was a nice story out there. They made a run to the area finals, like I say, but kind of an unexpected run in the district title. And then you had kind of teams that have been doing this a while. That's kind of where I put the Sunnyvale girls basketball team in. This is a program that's 4 years removed from a state title, but they make it back to the regional tournament where they lose by 1 in a heartbreaking fashion. But when it comes down to it, the team of the year is the Saxony girls basketball team. They made it to the state tournament for the first time ever. This is a program that's enjoyed a lot of success. They've been in the playoffs 10 of the last 12 years. They just won their third consecutive district championship in an undefeated fashion. But when you looked at him, and you even talking to Coach Don McCullough early on in the season, this was a team that a lot of people thought was a year away. They started a pair of juniors in Avery Krause and Tia Harvey, and then 3 sophomores, Jayla Brooks, Kayla Demas, and Adel Tack. So, you just look at the inexperience, even though a lot of these kids played as freshmen and sophomores, it's still, you kind of, when you just, given it the eye test on the roster, you say, okay, this is a team that next year is going to have a chance to be really good. But they kind of grew up, before our eyes, so to speak. Again, they've had some success in the playoffs, going a round or two. They actually made a regional final back in 2012. So they're cruising through district. They really weren't challenged, except for they had one game that was a 5-point game in the first half of district, and they won every other game by double figures. But you wonder in that district how that's going to translate to the playoffs. They start out with a easy win over Lake Highlands, and then they beat Horn 76-59, a very good, very athletic Horn team that was a co-district champion in 11-6A, and I thought that was kind of a statement win for them. They followed it up with a win over Tyler Lee that I think everybody pretty much assumed it was going to happen. They advanced to the regional tournament for the first time, and that's when they kind of caught the magic. They played Pflugerville in that regional semifinal game, and Pflugerville is up 27-4 early in the second quarter, and it looks like Saxe is not even, they didn't even get off the bus. And so you thought, okay, well, that was a nice story. They made a nice run at the regional tournament. They've got all these kids back. They can learn from this. Well, they go on to outscore them 64-29 from that point. It was just a completely different game. They end up winning 68-56. They ended up winning going away by double figures after being down 23 early in the second quarter, and that's when you thought this team might have something special. It might be on one of those proverbial magical rides.
So they really outscored them by 35 points the rest of the way then.
Yeah. It was two completely different games, in domination on one end and then complete domination on the other end. It was one of the most unbelievable turnarounds mid-game that I've ever seen. They carried that momentum over to the next day where they beat Pflugerville Henderson 67-63 to advance, like I say, to the state tournament for the first time. And then really, I was down there in San Antonio covering the state tournament, so I got to see all 3 games that were played down there, and Saxe proved they belonged. They were leading in the fourth quarter against Commerce Judson, a Commerce Judson team that pushed Plano to the very limit the following day before Plano was able to come out on top. But Saxe eventually falls 71-66, but again, just a tremendous job. Like I said, they got hot at the right time. They just kind of rode that wave of momentum through the playoffs. And again, all 5 starters will be back next season, and they also have a couple of younger kids, freshmen, that contribute for them this year. So Saxe coming in next year, maybe the team of the year next year as well.
When has there ever been a time when a Saxe team entered a season as the thinking kind of because I imagine it's got to be state tournament or bust for that team now heading into next season. I wonder if Saxe has ever had a team with that level of expectation heading into a year. Based on what they did this past season, probably not. They'll probably be top 5. Yeah, their football team this past year was state ranked. Preseason. Their girls soccer program has been nationally ranked before, as well as their boys soccer program back in the day. But their girls program has been pretty steadily nationally ranked. This is that's a team that has been going 23-1, 23-2. They were undefeated in the regular season a couple of years ago before losing to Highland Park when Highland Park was a 6A program. Those teams. But yeah, as far as by that same token, Saxe's never made the state tournament in soccer. Yeah. Now that they've gotten that close, and with what they have returning, now this is probably going to be the team at Saxe that carries the highest expectations of any coming into a new season. So the thing with my 3 markets, Plano, Allen, and Lake Cities, is that those markets actually got 2 selections for this, because both Taylor Ragland and I, write for those papers. So in a sense, when I give my selections, we had enough viable candidates in all 3 markets to where my selections and Taylor's selections were all different. So for the first of mine, I'm going to touch on my pick for Lake Cities. This was the story of 2017-18 for Lake Dallas Athletics was kind of just a redemption redemption year after they, just as an athletics program, really took it on the chin in District 14-5A that first year. They only had one sport they made the playoffs in, that was volleyball, the very first postseason of the 8 standing sports. So after that, it was just everybody went home early. Much better turnout though. They made the playoffs in 5 sports in 2017-18. Much more familiar than with what folks around that area are accustomed to seeing. And the squad that got that all rolling was the football team, as far as kind of embodying that bounce back mentality that Lake Dallas Athletics had. And that was my pick for best team. The Falcons, they went 7-5. They finished second in District 14-5A, and no small feat after finishing 5th the year before. They scored a number of very key wins. Avenged some losses, some big losses against schools like the Colony, against Little Elm. It was just a fun team to cover, a fun team to watch. Period. You kind of got a snootful of that. The very first game that I covered of theirs last season was that second week against Frisco Centennial, one of the crazier games that I've covered. We've talked about just the wild finish there, and that was that kind of set a bit of a tone for the year. Lake Dallas had a real penchant for survival in close quarters. I believe it was against Centennial, the Colony, Little Elm, and then their playoff win against Reedy. In all 4 of those games, they were either tied or trailed at some point in the fourth quarter. So they just really developed a knack for winning close games and doing so in pretty entertaining fashion. They're a fun team to watch, as they always will be. That offense, very dynamic, led by Ryan Depperschmidt at quarterback, Kylie Smith the running back, and then Brandon Englund, Christian Covington as at the receivers. It was a team that really kind of made good on the potential that they showed at times the year before, but again, it was winning those close games that kind of got away from them. Like that Little Elm game, the season before was a pretty, the game that essentially knocked them out of the playoffs in 2016. Able to, kind of grow up and learn from that, and then to see it all materialize and finishing second in the district, having an outside shot at winning the district title heading into that final week against Prosper. Ultimately, though, the Falcons do make the playoffs. They were one of, I believe, them and the boys soccer team were the only programs in Lake Dallas that won a playoff game. Lake Dallas beat Frisco Reedy 37-34, very good game there. And now, they had just another strong season to return to form. This is a program that has been Lake Dallas's model of consistency. They've made the playoffs all but 3 times since 1998. So just to get back on track the way that they did last year, and then kind of the tone that sets for heading into this coming season when they get started in District 7-5A Division II, where they should theoretically contend for the district title. Just a strong year for Lake Dallas football, and that was my pick for the best team out of Lake Dallas. Justin, another one of your markets. Where do you want to go?
We'll jump up to 6A now, and we'll start with Coppell. And kind of whereas the Colony, my pick didn't have the furthest playoff run, my pick for Coppell actually was, Coppell had 5 teams that won district championships, and this wasn't one of them. But I picked Coppell's boys soccer team because of what they were able to do in the postseason.
Wait, they didn't win the district title?
No, Richardson Pierce did.
Richardson Pierce did. Wow.
Yeah, so. But yeah, they picked their play up in the postseason, and they got back to the state tournament for the 4th time in 6 seasons. So that's pretty strong finish there.
Yeah.
And another note for the Coppell boys team is this was their first season under head coach James Balcom. Chad Rakestraw had taken them to the state, 3 times in 5 years with 2 state titles, but he went to Marcus. So James Balcom, he was an assistant under Rakestraw at Coppell before going out to the Northwest ISD school district, but he came back and then took the Cowboys to the state tournament. And they were just awesome in the playoffs. They made, before the losing to Reagan in the semifinals, they didn't allow a goal in the playoffs. Wow. So they went through their first 5 matches. They outscored their opponents 12-0, and kind of like the Colony's team, this is a pretty notable individuals on this squad. Jeremy Basso was first team All-State, and he was the defensive MVP. Wyatt Priest was second team All-State, and he was the offensive MVP from 9-6A. Not quite sure how he didn't get MVP. I guess just because they didn't win the district, they gave it to a district winner. But then Austin Simijan, the goalie, and Andrew Centillion were also All-State players. So 4 All-Staters for the Cowboys as well.
All right. Let's see. My pick for Plano. Obviously, it helps when the only team in PISD to win a state championship this previous school year. That'll oftentimes be the tiebreaker in discussions like this. The no surprise, the Plano girls basketball team was my pick for the best team out of Plano ISD. Obviously, they won their first ever state championship this past fall, as Devin alluded to earlier. They did so by it's trying to think back and try to what to make of the year that was for Plano senior girls basketball, and just the kind of the road that they've taken over the years to get to this point. This was a process that began back in 2015, which was both the first season at head coach for Rodney Belcher, plus the first year on varsity for two of his his only two 4-year lettermen, Katie Farrell and Emma Halverson, players that started right from the moment they stepped foot in the program. And when you see a team that starts 2 freshmen right out of the gates, you're thinking, oh wow, okay, this is, they've, for a school like Plano, it has, so many, such a talent pool to draw from. When you see, 2 freshmen crack the starting rotation for a basketball team, you're thinking, okay, these kids might, they might have something here with what this team could become. That year, ironically enough, they actually sent a bit of a minor shockwave through this community with defeating Duncanville in the second round of the playoffs. They advanced to the regional quarters that year. I believe it was Lauren Cox and Flower Mound that knocked them out. But you got to see kind of the potential right there with at least those 2 players and kind of what Plano was building to. And then with each year, they added another piece. I believe it was the following year when Lolo Davenport transferred from John Paul and joined the team. And then the following year, last season, 2016-17 was when, players like Jordan Merritt and Zaria Collins and Sophie Flighties really took on big roles on varsity. And then heading into this season, you had the rare situation with kind of like what Saxe has, where you had the entire team coming back, and just wondering what they might be able to do with all of that continuity and all that experience. It was a team that did have to shake off a bit of a bugaboo. They had they were beaten pretty soundly in the second round the year prior by South Grand Prairie. So they were going to have to go through Region 1. Region 1 was going to be a murderer's row no matter which which teams made the playoffs. And sure enough, looking at that playoff run, they took down 3 teams from District 7-6A, which is kind of thought of as kind of the bell cow district as far as DFW and maybe even the state of Texas as far as girls basketball goes. The district with Duncanville, DeSoto, Cedar Hill, those are 3 teams that Plano had to see within the first 5 rounds of the playoffs. And I think back to their, I believe their mantra at the start of the season. Every team has their catchy little slogan that's on the t-shirts and whatnot, but theirs was defend to the end or something along those lines. It's a team that prided themselves on defense first. And I was going back through a few of my game stories from those first 5 playoff games, and what stuck out was the turning point in at least their 3rd, 4th, and 5th round wins against Cedar Hill, Friendship, and Duncanville. All 3 games had a defining sequence that was determined by the defense. You had against Cedar Hill. Against Cedar Hill, Plano actually trailed the majority of that game and was down midway through the 3rd quarter, 33-30. And then they allowed just 3 baskets the rest of the game, and they ended up winning that thing going away. Against Friendship, they were only up 28-25 at the half against a Friendship team that wasn't state ranked. This was a game that Plano was a fairly sizable favorite going in, and Friendship was able to hang tough. But Plano played a zone. Friendship was able to spread them out and knock down some threes to kind of offset the the purpose of that zone. But so Plano decided to switch things up at the half, go back to man-to-man. They started switching on screens, and then as a result of that, they held Friendship scoreless for 7 full minutes of game time. And then against Duncanville, kind of with the exception of the state championship win against Judson, kind of a hallmark win for that team. Anytime you get a win over Duncanville, it's a big deal. Ironically enough, that senior class, at least those 2, Farrell and Halverson, as I mentioned earlier, they beat Duncanville twice during their high school careers. How many kids can say that? And against Duncanville, I was thinking back to that game, and Duncanville just came out guns blazing, looking like the Duncanville that you'd expect, most times, with a berth to the state tournament on the line. And then after the first quarter, Duncanville made just 9 shots the rest of the game. They committed 23 turnovers total. So Plano's defense was just devastating when it mattered most throughout the postseason. It was a team that on paper kind of had that makeup. They could trot out lineups where every player on the court was 5'10" to 6'2". Just teams don't have that kind of size and length outside of a team like Duncanville, and Plano was able to really maximize that potential on defense, really stay true to that team slogan. This team had depth that you got to see a bit at the state tournament, Devin. You could probably speak to this a bit better since you were covering the games down in San Antonio. But in years past, Coach Belcher often kept a pretty tight rotation. Sometimes the only thing that would force one of those starters to the bench was foul trouble. There were times when Plano would maybe play 6 players, maybe 7, but they were able to Coach Belcher opened the rotation up a bit more this season, and then it really once they got back Lolo Davenport midway through the playoffs, you really got to see what an advantage that was. I went back through them at the state tournament, Devin, and against their wins over Cy Creek and Judson, the bench outscored the opponents 42-6. What are your, just if you can just piggyback on this, just if you think back to, when you were down in San Antonio, and just what were your impressions of the eventual Class 6A state champions?
Well, I think, you just mentioned the bench. That was one thing that I had done, researching and talking to you before I went down there, and how long was Lolo Davenport out for?
She was out for 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
But you mentioned the second half of district on through the first 3 rounds of the playoffs.
That team had to learn how to play without her.
Yeah.
And bring her back and then bring her off the bench to run that second unit, so to speak, or as a fresh legs off the bench, just added an entirely different dimension. And I think you saw that because, again, especially on that stage, early on they're going to try to substitute in and out because you're trying to keep your nerves intact as well. But when you can pull Lolo Davenport out to run, quote unquote, the second unit against the other team's second unit, they don't have that kind of talent coming off the bench. So I guess just being able to use her and as well as the other players, on that bench, because like you say, they weren't a 6-man rotation. They went 7, 8, 9 people deep, and when you just look at the teams that they played, they didn't have that kind of depth, and so those stages early in the second quarter, early in the fourth quarter, when a lot of times you're resting your starters for the final push, that was when Plano really was kind of able to assert themselves.
Justin, let's see. We have Carrollton and Lewisville and Flower Mound to go.
We'll go with Flower Mound, and yet another team that didn't win the district title, but I'm selecting because
district titles mean nothing.
Yeah, Region 1 sometimes they really don't.
Hollow achievement,
especially in these districts. I'm gonna pick Marcus girls soccer team.
Again, it's tough to believe that they did not win that district when you look at what they did in the postseason.
South Lake Carroll actually won the district. Gave strong consideration to Marcus's track team that finished second, but we've kind of touched on them in this series earlier, so I wanted to give a little love to the girls soccer team, partly because maybe this is kind of a career type award because they've had a roster with some veteran players that have kind of been looking towards getting to the state. Each year, they kind of had the state aspirations and came up short, so really happy to see Marcus's girls team kind of get over that regional hump and get back to state. And like I said, they have some players like Taylor Moon, Maddie Algia, Katie Brown, Katie Himperly that are 4-year varsity players. So they've been together for a while, and big expectations every year. And this year they finally got over the hump, and they almost pulled it off. They get to the state finals after beating Katie Cinco Ranch in shootout in the state semifinals. So thrilling win there, but they just couldn't keep it going in the finals. But another good year for Marcus girls soccer team, and finally getting over that regional hump and getting back to state. And as I said, individually, Taylor Moon was an All-American player. She was the district co-MVP. Maddie Algio was the midfield MVP. They're both headed to Baylor. Stephanie Starr was the top goalkeeper, and then 8 or 9 other players that were all district also. So just a loaded team, and good to see them get back to the state tournament for the first time. I think 10 years maybe.
Wow.
So,
I was going to say, although I did have one team for my, for Northeast Dallas County, I will real quick just to throw in, because we're talking about district champions or the lack thereof. I will say the Mesquite boys soccer, I'll give them a little love. They were district champions. They led nearly wire to wire last year. Before getting overtaken by Rockball in the final day of this regular season. So that was a huge goal for them, was to win the district championship, and they did it this year. And then I mentioned them because they are the only Mesquite ISD team to make it 3 rounds deep in the playoffs. Nice. All year long. So they came out like as the district champions. They beat Lufkin in the first round, beat Naaman Forest in the second round before running into a red-hot Coppell team in the regional quarterfinals. But again, from a Mesquite standpoint, like I say, they are the only team that make it to get to that level this year. So shout out to Tony Bowles, who's done a great job building that program over there, and the Mesquite boys soccer team.
For my pick for Allen, this one required a bit more thought because while I said
competition. So you have a lot of competition over there.
I'll have a pick and then Taylor will have a pick, later on in the podcast. But it did mean for Allen that you had to leave one state champion out because Allen had the rare year where they had three athletics programs win state championships. So basically it was just a lot of internal deliberation between either Allen's football team, the boys basketball team, and the wrestling team. With two of those, it's kind of become commonplace. The wrestling team won its 9th consecutive state championship. So as far as kind of how to an elimination process, so to speak, with these programs where state championships have become a bit more commonplace, on the football field and the wrestling mat, you're kind of held to that standard, I would think, kind of heading into these seasons, and you're kind of measured against how memorable that championship is, so to speak. Like Allen's won 9 state championships in wrestling. They've essentially rewritten the UIL state tournament record books when it comes to wrestling. Everything from points, total points accrued at the state meet to margin of victory. They've had some, so while the 2017-18 team kept that lineage going, I don't believe I think they've had more emphatic state tournament wins in years past over the course of this ongoing dynasty. With the football team winning its 5th state championship this past year, its first since 2014, and you're kind of, it was a great team. Everything from from just a sheer checklist standpoint, the 16-0 record. They were, things like the margin of victory during the playoffs, was up to snuff. But they're, compared against, I can't say that just unequivocally that was the best football team that Allen has had. They're more going against, some of those Kyler Murray teams were great. The team that won the first title back in 2008 was great in its own right. There's so much history and tradition there. I can't say that definitively the 2017 Eagles, were the best. I do know for a fact, though, that the boys basketball team had its best year ever, and this was its best team ever, and that culminated in their first ever state championship in March. And they did so by beating, I think, relative to other programs. That boys basketball team, they earned every last bit of that state championship. When you look at the teams that they had to go through to get there, they beat 5 teams that were ranked in the state's top 20 heading into the postseason, including number 1 Denton Guyer, number 2 Austin Westlake, number 7 Duncanville, so that's 3 in the top 10 right there, and then number 17 Katy Tompkins and number 20 North Crowley. Not only did they beat great teams, but they beat just an absolute all-star cast of individual players along the way. During their playoff run, Allen defeated 10 players that were ranked in the state's top 20 for their respective class. Everybody from Austin Westlake's group of Will Baker, Matthew Mayer, Brock Cunningham, and Keontae Kennedy, Denton Guyer's All-Stars with Davion Harmon, Jalen Wilson, Grayson Carter. There was some talent, and Allen relied a bit more on depth. This was a team that as I just mentioned, within those top 10 players that were ranked in the state's top 20 for their respective class, Allen didn't have any players among that group. By the time the state tournament started, Allen had I just remember this, getting there to the state tournament and looking around at all the 4 teams that were there, looking at their rosters, and you had what I just mentioned, Westlake, Westlake was like a glorified high school all-star team last year with those 4 kids. You had South Garland with Tyrese Maxey, maybe the best player in the country for for the class of 2019.
Chris Harris.
Plus Chris Harris Jr. You had even Katy Tompkins with which had 2 of the top 10 players ranked in the state with Jamal Bianemi and Christian Scholand. When Allen got there, Allen had 2 kids that were committed to play at the college level. They had Jalen Walker, their the anchor of their front court anchor. He was committed to play at Navy, and then they had Jordan Neely, who's one of the scorers off the bench, committed to Bethel, an NAIA school out in Kansas. They did not have the top shelf star power that some of these other teams did. Instead, they kind of had more of a strength in numbers approach. They really kind of like Plano, and they made great use of their depth, against some of these more top heavy teams. Just you think of just how they were able to, get on the run that they did. Leading up prior to the state tournament, when I wrote my, a feature leading up to their state semifinal game, the theme of it was their versatility and the roster's ability to pretty much adapt to any style of gameplay, which they showed. I mean, that's a team that at its heart likes to run, likes to space the floor, gun threes. They really do embrace that kind of that up and down style that is so paramount in high school basketball. But they showed that if called upon, they could play slow. I mean, that was obviously the big storyline from that regional finals win against Denton Geyer, when after getting hammered by Geyer, in their second district meeting, they decided to complete. Decided what, we like to run, but so do they, and we can't run with a team like that has that kind of size and that kind of athleticism. So they decided to just the day of the game, when they're in their hotel room, Coach McCullough called his captains in and said, okay, we're going to slow the game down. Are you guys okay with that? And they all bought in. They decided to grind the pace of that game to a snail's pace. And the result was that while you had a Geyer team that, from a sheer just top shelf talent and star power standpoint, was overmatched Allen, Geyer didn't know how to adapt. Geyer didn't know how to play when, once Plan A went out the window, they didn't have a Plan B. And you got to see Allen kind of showcase that versatility and really control Geyer in a way that no other team was able to do. And they ended up, winning that game. I want to say it was 40-36, which is insane when you think of a Geyer team that could score up to 100 points some nights.
That was probably the halftime score the first time they played her.
If they were clicking. They were a team that could thrive playing any number of styles. They didn't have a traditional center. Everybody around the team it's almost like a modern day NBA team when you think of the way that the NBA's trended, where kind of the it thing now is having just a surplus of 6'7", 6'8" wings that are switchable, can play multiple positions, where versatility has kind of become the name of the game in the NBA. It's kind of fitting that the two teams that probably best fit that description within the state were the two teams that wound up playing for the state championship, and Allen and Tompkins, teams that really were kind of evenly spread across from a height standpoint and could play a number of different styles, and that was what contributed to that championship game being so competitive, so back and forth until and then as I mentioned the finish to that game. That's when I think back of just Allen ISD athletics for 2017-18, the finish to that championship game, and just the crazy everything from Jamal Bienemi going one-on-one against Jalen Scott with the game tied inside the final 10 seconds. Jalen Scott stonewalling one of the top players in the state, and then Jalen Walker getting the rebound, turning and heaving the outlet pass up to both Donovan Parham and Isaiah Stevens, just streaking down the court unguarded and wide open for a fast break layup in the closing seconds of overtime. Donovan Parham obviously was the one to make the game-winning layup that ultimately would get Allen its first state championship in boys basketball. That's going to be the kind of the defining clip, the defining highlight from Allen athletics for me this past year. So to no surprise, what a year for the boys basketball program, and that's my team of the year for Allen. Let's close this out with, we got one more year's GT, another state champion.
Yep, Hebron volleyball for the third year in a row, which is a pretty big feat in its own right. Mm-hmm. Amarillo is the only other team that's won 3 in a row at the largest classification. Theirs was 5A, now 6A, but still was the largest there. They actually won 4 in a row, so Hebron's going to be trying to match them this season with their 4th in a row. But 3 straight titles for Hebron's volleyball team, and I guess one of the things that stands out to me is just the dominance that this team has had in the postseason. Last year, they didn't lose a set in the entire run to state,
which is insane.
This year, they beat Denton Geyer 3-1 in the bi-district round. Didn't lose a set the whole rest of the way after that. So
shout out to Denton Geyer.
Yeah, 4th place team, only team to take a set off them in the playoffs the last few years. So 14 matches over the last few years, just 1 set loss. I think over their 3 state championships, I think they've lost 4 sets in the playoffs. So they're not just winning state, they're getting to the playoffs and dominating teams. And as we've talked about, that's no small feat in this, especially this
Absolutely.
region.
Yeah.
They went undefeated in district. That's a district that featured a Byron Nelson team that made the regional tournament, a South Lake Carroll team they made the 3rd round.
They had their way with 6-6A in the first round. I was so impressed by how 5-6A showed out in the start of the volleyball playoffs.
So but nobody could even beat Hebron in district in that conference. And then just look at how they did it. Not how many teams win a state championship the year after they graduate the Player of the Year. So Kylie McLaughlin heads off as
got another one waiting in the wings.
But Donna Rollins slides right in and picks up that honor this year, wins state championship MVP for the second year in a row. And we'll see what they can do next year. They have a player like Emma Clothier, who's going to be a senior. She's never lost a playoff game yet. So, I mean,
that's crazy.
She's going into her fourth year on varsity. She's been a contributor, and she doesn't know what it's like to lose in the playoffs yet. So, just a big salute to the Hebron Hawks winning 3 in a row, and just the domination that they did in doing so.
Right on. That's a look at, I guess, the first half of our selections for best team for the this latest edition of the Varsitys. We're going to do a full sale line change. Bring in Taylor Ragland, Kendrick Johnson, Brian Murphy. They're going to give their picks for their markets in just a bit after a word from this sponsor. Today's Student Athlete Spotlight is brought to you by Bavarian Grill, authentic Bavarian food and beer garden. Listed by the Zagat survey as the highest rated German restaurant in Texas for 12 years in a row. 12 years, that's 3 presidential terms. You can enjoy traditional and authentic spring favorites now, everything from appetizers like slow roasted ham hock and potato pancakes to entrees like bratwurst or breaded schnitzel. Bring your whole family for lunch and dinner. They are open Tuesday through Saturday, located off Parker and Highway 75 in Plano. Bavarian Grill. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. I'm Taylor Ragland. I'll be your host for this second half. We're flying without Mount Mitchell again this week. So I'm joined by Brian Murphy, who does sports for Frisco, Prosper, and Little Elm, and Kendrick Johnson, who holds down McKinney for us.
And Celina.
Yes, and Celina also. We're going to, finish up with our second half of our Varsitys discussion about best team. So I know we both have multiple markets. Kendrick has McKinney, and we'll hit on all of them. So you wanted to start with Frisco, Brian? Is that what I heard?
Let's do Frisco. Let's do the big monster first.
Okay.
So last week on our podcast, we were mentioning, players. I mentioned players that got snubbed. I mentioned those guys first.
I'm sure there's a lot teams that get snubbed in Frisco too when you have that many schools.
So the easy answer would be Wakeland boys soccer, Wakeland girls soccer.
Right.
2 state championship squads. But I'm actually not going to pick either one of them for best team. So call me crazy. I've been saying it all year. I think the best pound for pound Frisco team was the Lone Star girls basketball team. They were ranked number 3 in the state. Adriana Quesada, Mallory Adams, Mia Deck. Head coach Katie Stinton. She's intense, the most intense girls basketball coach you'll ever see.
And she does not fall in those heels.
No, rocking like 4-inch heels on the sideline. I don't know how she does it, but she's intense, and they're ranked number 3 in the state. If it wasn't for Mansfield Timberview in the regional semifinal, they would have gone to state. Possibly won state if they weren't paired up against Timberview.
Right.
The best 5A team, hands down, in the state in girls basketball.
Right.
Dynasty. Over the last few years. So Lone Star girls basketball. Their starting lineup was ridiculous. They had the district MVP in Mallory Adams. She's off to San Diego State. And they lose her. She's graduated, but they have a couple players I just mentioned before coming back, and just pound for pound, they're the best team. Just so dominant. They're 14-0 in district play. No one in district play even came close to beating them. Liberty, I think, came close, and it was like 14-point deficit. No one could compete with them. They were playing, Canyon and all these Argyle, all these teams in non-district, competing with them, beating some. They were playing against some California teams, hanging with them. So I think they proved that they're the best team. And I didn't want to go the easy route picking.
The question is, do they reload this year?
Well, they lose Mallory Adams, but they have Quesada. They have 4 of their 5 starters returning. 4 of them are juniors.
So but Mallory Adams.
But Mallory Adams, that's a big blow. But I think the income, they'll have a strong senior core this year. So we'll see. They may not be as dominant, but they'll win the district for sure.
One of my programs in Lake Dallas girls basketball found out exactly how good Lone Star was this year.
Round,
so
right?
it was a beating for sure, and there was a little bit of a talent discrepancy, I would think, in those programs. Lake Dallas girls basketball maybe on the come up a little bit, but that was a good taste for them probably of what the class of 5A is like if you want to compete at that kind of level.
That score was 80-20.
Yeah, it was rough for the Lady Falcons. So I guess I'll go with another district. I guess one high school in Allen that has several options for who could be best team. Some 3 state champions, I think, off the top of my head, team-wise at least, this year with wrestling, and football and boys basketball. I know Matt, I think, went with boys basketball for best team. And I was really tempted to go with wrestling because just the pure dominance and winning 9 state championships in a row, it's kind of hard to...
How do you avoid football? You know, like you have to pick football.
I think that's kind of where I landed on it. It was an honorable mention at the very least for wrestling, but it was almost just so expected. Not that Allen football is not expected to be good, but at this point it's a formality for Allen wrestling, and it's their goal is state or bust, just like Allen football, but it's been a lot less competitive, I would say. But yeah, my best team in Allen, I give the nod to Allen football. Perfect season, return to being state champions, a really thrilling state final, narrow victory. Brock Sturgis was incredible in that game. They had talent, across the board, as Allen always does, with Theo Weiss, Grant Tisdale. Just kind of a real statement season, I think, for them. They've had some down years after Kyler Murray left. They've had some. I say down years. They're still going
for their standards.
For their standards, they're still going to the state semifinals or however far they make it every single year. But yeah, for them to run through district as they always do, and then get into the playoffs and complete the perfect season and kind of return to dominance. I'll give them my nod for best team from Allen this year. But like I said, it's a tough choice because when you have that many state champions in one year and that many dominant teams as Allen, as Matt kind of talked about, Allen boys basketball, deserved everything they got, deserved their state championship, had an incredible run in the postseason, and then obviously wrestling, like I mentioned, is just, it would almost be too easy too to just say, that's probably the best team at Allen because they just literally never lose. This year at state, they almost had their first day point total at the state wrestling meet was almost enough to win state. Like they were by the time it was said and done, second place, they would have almost beat them with just what they had in the first day. So that's the biggest of honorable mentions, I guess, for Allen wrestling because
Allen was tough. Frisco's tough. Yeah. Kendrick's not as tough. McKinney, there's one clear cut.
Easily. McKinney boys soccer team. I feel bad for. Usually, I watch a game regardless. I'm covering a professional sport, high school sport. Don't care who wins. I just want to see some action. I really felt bad for them. You had parents crying when they got beat. They played in a 40-mile windstorm and way out in Midland, West Texas, and the ball literally didn't bounce their way. And on top of that, they scored a goal that got disallowed. That was clear as day. Tanner Binion had peeled back, got back on sides, heads it in, and then they took it off. So they literally got robbed.
When was the last time they lost a game before that?
They lost last year in the first round of the in the by-district against Southlake, but they did not lose in regulation. That's the first time they lost in regulation in 46 games.
They had some rough conditions throughout the playoffs this year, didn't they? Because I was out at their game against McKinney. Was that the third round of the postseason this year? That game was nuts too. McKinney gave them a little bit of a run for money, aided by the wind because they were playing out at Poe, I believe, and it was whipping there too. So Boyd just had kind of just one of those years, man. A little snake bit in the playoffs, and you run into some bad conditions and.
I wouldn't say snake big did that. Last year they got snake. They got beat in the first round, and it was kind of deja vu. They got beat in the first round against Southlake in a shootout, and that was their motivation. They went undefeated last year, didn't lose no games in regulation, and got beat in the shootout. This year they come back around. They cruised through District 6A, some of the best teams in the state. They dominated them, raised their game when they had to. Shout out to Coach Kobe Peak. First year had all these expectations, and he delivered better than you could. The only thing he could have did better was get a state title.
Yeah, honestly, watching them play McKinney and just seeing the talent they had, David Ortiz, just the talent they had on the field. David Ortiz, Evan Connor,
Adrian Cordy, and Roberto Gonzalez Gutierrez are all coming back from a team that had like 10 or 11 seniors that have been together from day one. That core with Jack Monty and let's go Tanner Binion and their goalie. He was the man.
Now, are they going to be able to reload next year? The same?
It'd be a different. It's going to be different cast of characters with the same principles, but their JV just dominated too. One thing a lot of people don't know, unless you really follow soccer, is Boyd's been one of the top 5 teams in the nation the last 2 years. Give or take from 1 to like 3 or 4, but they've been perennially ranked in the top 4 in the nation, not just the state. So the only thing they need to crown that program is that title. That's kind of slipping through their hands.
Yeah, that's kind of the feeling that I got just from this postseason. Because I watched them play and watching them play in 6A all year. It was, you really felt like they had a shot to go all the way and finally kind of burst that bubble.
But besides talent, they had mental fortitude.
Yeah.
They came back around this year. They played South Lake again in a shootout, but this time it was in their backyard. And Chase Coy, he took the loss personal, giving up those 3 goals last year. This time it was 1 for 4. He shut down 3 of them.
Wow.
Yeah,
And they rode that emotional wave all the way to the regional final until the windstorm shut it down.
Yeah, seems like they're on the doorstep. So
So
we'll
weird
see.
that you play that game in West Texas. Irving against McKinney Boyd, and you play it in
Yeah.
West
In a
Texas,
windstorm.
45-mile
Makes no
windstorm.
All right, Brian. Well, you've talked a little bit about Frisco. Where else do you want to go?
So you mentioned how Boyd couldn't get over the hump this past year. A team that did is Prosper Volleyball. They hadn't won a state title. They'd come knocking. They'd been close. They'd been state ranked. One of the best teams in the state over the last few years. They finally get it done. They only lose 3 sets total in the playoffs.
Wow.
2 of them came in that final game when they had to come back and win 3-2. And they had a nice senior class graduate. So. And then also their last year in 5A, so it was like, not saying they can't repeat in 6A.
I think they will compete at least in 9-6A, at least in district play for sure.
They'll be able to compete, but they won't be a state title favorite like they were in 5A.
Oh no, that would be Hebron, the 3-time defending champion,
Right.
who bring their whole roster except for 2 girls back. Man,
Yeah.
that's insane.
And I saw Hebron play a little bit after.
They're phenomenal. That ball does not touch the ground.
Yeah, I saw Hebron play in the state championship game after Prosper won their game. I was writing my story, kind of peeking up a little bit, and man, Hebron was by far the best volleyball team I've ever seen. And I just saw them play maybe 2 sets. But yeah,
and last year was a reloading year.
Yeah, right.
But back to Prosper, they easily win, best team. There, you could pick, almost any Prosper team for best team. Baseball almost made it to state. Prosper football, soccer, girls soccer, boys soccer, all the above. Softball was undefeated, in district play. Celina football is always a powerhouse, but you got to go with Prosper volleyball for going all the way and getting over the hump.
Yeah, Prosper is definitely another one of those, like you mentioned, just where it literally could have gone anyway, because I think they were probably the definition of a 5A school that was ready to move up. I mean, they were just so dominant that it wasn't even fair. And I guess
but the thing is, people say that about basically they're a 6A playing 5A, but nobody says nothing. Oh, Allen does this, Allen does that. It's the biggest school in the state. What you expect?
Yeah.
Like they just roll out. They're going to the playoffs in any team sport.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you have almost 6,500 kids now.
And then what is like Boyd and McKinney? They're
3,000.
Yeah. It's like Allen, the Plano schools,
that's not fair fight.
More than double.
Huge drop off.
Yeah.
I guess I will go from your school that finally got over the hump in Prosper Volleyball to a team that got over a much smaller hump, let's put it that way, but in Lake Dallas Boys Soccer. That was my pick for Lake Cities, for Lake Dallas as the best team, and I picked them because they kind of had a perfect storm of a year, at least for them, in that they got their first playoff win ever. And that in itself was a huge accomplishment for a team that was kind of right on the cusp, had made the postseason and bowed out in the bi-district round, just hadn't quite gotten there. And I think this year it all just kind of came together a little bit. They had a co-district MVP in Blake Henson, who will leave now. They had several really, really talented seniors. They had Caleb Irving and net, who will return actually, I believe as a junior. So they have a little bit of talent coming back, but I think this year was just a really special year for their program. I think they were talented pretty much up and down the lineup. Like I said, they got that bi-district win over Frisco Lone Star, and gave Lovejoy a run for its money in the next round. It was a much tighter game than I anticipated, because I covered both of those games, and Lovejoy literally needed a last-minute goal in regulation, literally last minute, and then an overtime goal to move on and dispatch Lake Dallas. So that team was the real deal. I think a lot of people had them kind of written off as, like you always do when, okay, they made the playoffs, but they've never been able to get over the hump. They've never been able to even win a postseason game. So for them to come out and kind of finally get that monkey off their back and get a little bit of momentum, the talent level I think definitely helped, because I think they were one of the more underrated teams, I guess, or sneakily talented, I guess you could say, in the area. So they were the real deal, and I think that their second round appearance, obviously the best season they've ever had, but I think was beyond expectations, and just a fantastic year for that program. So they got my nod. I think Matt went with Lake Dallas football, obviously another really, really solid program. Lake Dallas baseball had a really good year, making the playoffs, battling out Frisco Reedy in the first round, but they had a solid year behind Mason Meeks, Ryan Deppersmith, who will be back. Some really talented players there too.
Shout out to Mason Meeks.
Yeah.
All he did was win the game. People like, he's not that good. He only throws 85. He's only got getting that W last year.
Yeah. He even, I guess you want to just touch on Lake Dallas baseball for a minute. They, took down Prosper in district, no small part thanks to Mason Meeks and a couple other arms that game. Runner-up to Prosper, who, was just another one of those teams from Prosper who was just dominant and pretty tough to beat. So the fact that they beat them once was pretty nice. And then, just making the playoffs and taking Reedy 3 games. But solid seasons from football, baseball, some other programs. Girls basketball made the playoffs, even though they had that big loss we talked about. But I'm going to give the nod for best team to Lake Dallas boys soccer. So
and Lake Dallas beating Lone Star in soccer in the first round, that was no easy feat.
Yeah,
Lone Star,
they were good too. Very
soccer,
similar situation too with their soccer programs. Both kind of looking for that. I think both looking for their first playoff victory. I'm not sure Lone Star has one either. So,
but that Frisco district in soccer is ridiculous. All the coaches will tell you that that's the toughest soccer district in the state. It produces state champions. It has produced state champions in the last 2 years. And Lone Star, they finished ahead of Wakeland in the standings.
Yep.
And they had the second most goals in the district.
They were no joke.
Which is crazy. And then Lake Dallas beats them in the first round.
Yeah,
so.
That's kind of what I was talking about with Lake Dallas. I think everybody kind of, you don't prove yourself until you prove yourself. I know that's a silly thing to say, but nobody's going to take you seriously until you start actually doing things and making a little noise and getting some playoff wins. So maybe, this momentum kind of carry Lake Dallas a little bit into the future, even though they're losing some pretty serious top-end talent. So I guess we'll go back over to you. I think you have one more, don't you?
A team that isn't losing top-end talent is the Little Elm boys basketball team with, RJ Hampton. I feel like I say his name on every podcast. I'm not trying to be a homer here, but the Little Elm boys basketball team was by far the best team in Little Elm. They finished 13-1. Their only loss was to Prosper. They shared the district crown with Prosper. The only team that Prosper, didn't. Their only district championship for Little Elm. The only one that Prosper didn't win outright.
RJ will do that for you.
Oh yeah. Top 3 player in the nation right now. And a little teaser, I'll actually have a story on RJ, winning the gold medal a couple weeks ago in Argentina, and just how his summer's going. I know he's all over the place with all the NBA camps. Future NBA player right there, RJ Hampton. That story will be in this Friday's paper. But yeah, the Little Elm boys basketball team by far the best team in Little Elm, and they have some players coming back, some familiar faces, and then some unfamiliar faces making their way to Little Elm. So that'll be for a future podcast. We'll talk about that then. But they should be locked and loaded for another big year next year.
Cool. I guess we'll wrap it up with my selection for Plano. Another school where it was kind of tough to pick a best team. Obviously, the girls basketball team went and won state and had a tremendous season. The girls track team, I believe, got 5th at state, which was a great finish for them. But I'm going to go with the team I covered the most out of the Plano teams in softball. And the reason that I'm going to go with softball, one, they tied their best season ever. They made the state semifinals where they lost to Atascocita this year, but like I said, tied for their best season ever. And I think the thing that stands out for me about how they did it is, for lack of a better word, how they did it. They overcame an injury to Bronte Roden, who we would come to find out couldn't pitch in the postseason. They were essentially telling us and everybody else kind of keep it hidden that they were resting her and saving her for certain games, but come to find out she had an injury that was preventing her from pitching. So they had to go with sophomore Audrey McNeil, and she just took over, and I mentioned her as my breakthrough athlete on one of these. I don't remember, did we do that for the podcast? We did, I believe.
We did.
So I mentioned her for that, but I want to mention her again just as part of this best team discussion, because the way that she stepped in and took over in the circle, and the way that the team as a whole kind of rallied around and was cohesive throughout the postseason, beat Keller, which was a hump that PISD schools couldn't get over. Keller took down East and West last season when both of those teams looked like potential state contenders. So for Plano to go in, and I believe Matt was talking to somebody associated with Keller that covers Keller, and they said that was the best team Keller's had in a while. So for Plano to go and beat them and make the state semifinal, it was a really, really solid year. Like I said, tied for their best ever at Plano softball, and just the way they did it. A real team vibe, a really good energy around that team whenever you covered them. Very excited, very positive, and it carried over into a tremendous performance. So,
Kendrick, how close was McKinney football to getting the best team in McKinney, in your guys?
They were the story of the year. Nobody picked them to do what they did, but the second team for had to be McKinney North. They were two-time defending state track team. They just like, hey, we're just gonna see what happened, and they almost got a third state title by default.
Right.
Going against a Mansfield Lake Ridge team that's like a Prosper that was a 6A.
They're 6A now.
right.
Go against 5A, so technically they had the best 5A talent. But they do a good job over there in their track program. Coach Richards and them have everybody going, and then you have London Colbreth, 55 URL races with cross country and track combined. 55 W's and 3 state titles.
That's crazy. I think you
and she got 2 more years left.
Yeah, I think you probably made the best choice for best team though. When I looked at that category, it was pound for pound what I thought just the kind of the best team or the most dominant team or the most talented team or whatever the case may be. And I think boys soccer was far and away the best overall product and overall team in that city this year for sure. So I guess that'll just about do it. That'll wrap our varsity discussion. That'll wrap our discussion of best team. So that's us signing off, not Matt Welch. This will be me signing off this week. It's a good feeling. So we will be back on Thursday. You guys have a good start to your week, and we hope to see you then.